In this video, we're going to take a look at the average product of labor and the marginal product of labor. So the average product of labor means that we're just looking at the amount that was produced and dividing it through by the number of workers. So the average product of labor is simply quantity divided by labor. And the marginal product of labor means that we're going to look at the change in quantity divided by the change in labor. So basically, what we can do is just start off with our graph. So this information, this is where we left off last time. We had the number of workers and the output. So I've gone ahead and copied over the numbers. So if there are 2 workers producing 16 units of output, that means that there's obviously on average 8 units of output per person. And then if there are 5 workers producing 46 units of output, on average each one is producing 9.2 units of output. Then the marginal product of labor is the change from one worker to the next worker. So basically it's the change from 0 workers to 1 workers. Okay, so as we move from not having any employees to having our first employee, 1 employee can produce 6 units. If we move to our second employee, we'll have our second person, 2 people together are able to make 16 units. So that means that the change from 1 person producing 6 units and 2 people producing 16 units would be an increase of 10 units. So the marginal product of labor is actually the change from the first worker to the second worker, and from the second worker to the third worker. Okay, so now let's go ahead and graph this. Well, setting up our graph the same way that we did last time, with quantity on the vertical axis and the number of workers on the horizontal axis. Once we start plotting the data, what we're going to do is we're going to plot the average product of labor first. And let's see, I'm going to use a red pen to do the average product of labor and a purple pen to do the marginal product of labor. So plotting the points for the average product of labor. 1 worker is able to produce 6 units, so we have a circle, a little dot there. 2 workers are able to produce 8 on average each, and so we've got, kind of a rough sketch of what our graph is going to look at. If I were to do this in using our graphing tool, I could make a much prettier graph, but then we wouldn't really plot the points the same, and we'd have to do a lot of back and forth. So, this is kind of just a rough idea of how to do it. The finished project for a firm project, the finished product for a firm project would obviously look significantly better than this. Okay, so as I connect these dots, I end up with, a average product of labor that increases a lot in the beginning and then starts to slow down. Okay, that's, we don't have too much information to go off until we have both curves together. So next I'm going to plot the points for the marginal product of labor. So these purple dots that I've put in are the ones for the marginal product of labor. Okay, so this is going to be my marginal product of labor. And once we create this graph, we see some very interesting things. Not that your instructor missed a couple of the points with her drawing tool, but what we see is there are certain things that we want to pay attention to. Notice this point right here, where the marginal product of labor and the average product of labor intersect. That point of intersection right there. Before that point, all of the the average product of labors were all positive. Okay. After that point, the marginal product of labor is negative. Okay. So at that point, they are equal. Now, you have a homework question that says, where is the marginal product and the average product of labor equal? You have to graph that question in order to find the answer. You can't just say, oh, at 2 they're equal. No, it's going to be between numbers, so you actually have to make the graph to see where those 2 intersect. So this point is a point of inflection in the average product of labor. So basically what's happening is, as we hire more and more workers with our fixed amount of capital, each worker becomes a little less efficient. The marginal product of labor, that additional worker, is actually starting to pull down the average of all of the existing workers that we hire after that point. So these people are becoming less and less efficient. It's not necessarily that. So the slope is increasing, but so over here the slope is decreasing. But over here the slope is increasing, but it's increasing at a decreasing rate. So the change from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 were bigger than the changes from 3 to 4 or 4 to 4.5, I guess you would say. So important things to notice is once the average product of labor starts to decrease, it can never increase. Same thing with the marginal product of labor. Once it starts to decrease, it can never start to come back up unless we were to hire more workers. So that's something to be very, very careful of. This is something very important going on here, how the marginal product of labor, the additional workers that we're hiring are actually pulling down the average, and each worker is a little bit less efficient because we have more workers. That's all due to the fixed capital. So in the long run, we don't see this happening, but in the short run, we have diminishing marginal product, meaning that the marginal product of labor is starting to decrease at a certain point. So here we would say that, it's at the fifth worker, somewhere between the fourth worker and the fifth worker, but at the fifth worker, we definitely see diminishing product of labor. At the fourth worker, even though it's between the fourth and the fifth, at the fourth, things are still increasing, and if we hire the fifth worker, that starts pulling everything down. So the fifth worker is where we see diminishing marginal product starting to happen. So what does that mean for a business? Do they hire that fifth worker? Well, it depends. That fifth worker is still on their own, basically. Their marginal product is still producing 8 units of output. That would be their individual productivity. Well, if it's 8 units of output and they're able to sell those for a profit of, $300 a piece, then yeah, we still hire that worker. If they're able to produce 8 units of output and, it would cost us $50 to produce them and the revenue would be $40, then no, we wouldn't hire that person. So we don't have enough information yet to say where we would stop hiring, but we know that the fifth worker is producing 8 units of output, and that's slowing everybody else down. Okay, after this, we're going to switch gears. Instead of looking at worker output, we're going to look at the cost that the firms are having to pay for all of their fixed costs, their variable cost, and then we'll look at their average fixed, average variable, average total, and we'll kind of look at the different cost curves and create more graphs like this in the next video.